All right. Awesome. We are live. Hello, my name is Melanie Dizon. I'm the Director of Education and Content at the Davis Finney Foundation, and I am here today with Rich and Sharon. How are you guys doing?
Good. Nice to see you.
Good. So we were just talking about Mexico. First of all, where were you in Mexico?
We were in Zihuatanejo.
Oh, yes. How was it?
Hot.
Hot.
It was wonderful. It was
Good.
wonderful.
And how long were you there?
About a month.
Oh my gosh, that sounds just so nice.
We needed an escape from Boulder. I think
Yeah.
February was the coldest, snowiest month I ever remember here.
Right? Yeah, it was, and sort of decidedly gray, uncharacteristic of Boulder for sure. I went to, I guess it's been almost 2 weeks. I was in Puerto Vallarta just for a very quick weekend, but it was a nice little diversion from this. So nice to get away. So, all right. So Rich, you are living with Parkinson's, and Sharon, you are the care partner extraordinaire. So
She's living with it.
she's living with it. I would love to talk a little bit about, what was your life like before Parkinson's? What were you doing? What were you up to? And then what led up to your initial, something's not quite right?
Well, there's a lot to say to that. I guess what I was doing is living my life very fully with lots of outdoor activity and lots of sharing of sports with friends and stuff like that. To where
Did you have favorite sports? What were you doing?
I was a skier. I was a tennis player. I backpacked. I swam early in the morning, not when Polly was out there, but close to the same time. And
A runner.
I was a runner. So I just did all kinds of outdoor activities with friends, and I just sort of assumed that would go on forever. So in terms of before and after, it's really interesting. One of the things that I found myself doing recently is when talking about activities that I do or don't do, I say, I used to do such and such, and I decided to remove the words used to from my vocabulary because everything is used to, and it's before and after being diagnosed. Even though things didn't change all that quickly, nothing was the same. And so the used to doesn't really apply anymore.
That's a hard thing. I would imagine. Language is so important, right? And saying used to didn't feel good for you. It didn't feel like, well, that's not really helpful serving me. That's not feeling great. So that was just something I did. Now I do these things. So were you I've talked about this a lot, but I think that first of all, a lot of the people that are part of our community are active, right? We really promote exercise, moving, all of those things. And so a lot of them are attuned to their body, and they were exercising pre-Parkinson's. And I think those people have had a natural tendency to know when something was not quite right. Maybe they were doing it while they were running and their gait wasn't quite the same, or they were playing tennis and they couldn't, rotate like they used to. So there's a lot of different things. What was it for you? When did you first start noticing symptoms?
Well, I noticed when I would go backpacking or cross country skiing with friends, I had the sense, which may or may not have been true, that I could or couldn't keep up, and I was feeling potentially a little guilty that I was going to slow people down, and was hesitant sometimes to participate because I didn't want to slow people down. But I noticed that in terms of physical things that other people could notice. My right arm didn't swing, some of the typical things that happen with people with Parkinson's. And the other thing besides active was sports. One of the things that was a big part of our life was travel. Sharon and I traveled a lot for the 10 years up until my diagnosis and afterwards. And that was a big part of our life. And when all of a sudden we noticed that the kinds of things that we still wanted to do, there's a limited time maybe to do those, and we had to get them in quickly. That was a different figure ground of how urgent these things were, but still really, really important to us.
Yeah. So what landed you with the doctor? First of all, Power for Parkinson's. Hi, Rich and Sharon checking in from Austin, Texas. Thanks for joining us.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
What landed you at the doctor? Your
Well,
arm, you just said, "Hey, I'm going in. I'm not feeling quite right." Or-
I had a therapist that thought that I had a little bit of a tremor, although I didn't notice a tremor at all.
And I didn't either.
You didn't either, Sharon? No.
And I don't think this has to do with it, but I think you may know that my dad had Parkinson's and was diagnosed at age 64, the same age that I was.
Oh,
And so I didn't have my antenna out of, am I going to experience Parkinson's as well? But I think having that in the background made me curious that might there be something else going on that I was willing to accept.
right. So the doctor, you get a diagnosis, and Sharon, were you with Rich at the time? Oh, let her come back. Okay. Was she with you when you got your diagnosis, Rich?
She was.
Okay.
And
What was that like? What was that? You remember he said, or she said, you have Parkinson's. What did you feel in that moment?
Well, what I remember most vividly, I won't mention names, of course, but I was very displeased with my experience with a neurologist when I went to be looked at. He said, I want you to take Mirapex. I want you to take this medication, and in 2 months, talk to me. And if it makes a difference, that means you've been diagnosed with Parkinson's. So it was a matter of elimination rather than a positive identification. And that particular doctor just didn't engender a lot of confidence in terms of belief in what his diagnosis was going to be. So I felt very skeptical to begin with.
Yeah. What about you? What happened when you heard it, Sharon?
Well, it took about a year. I mean, from when we saw the first neurologist who said it might be Parkinson's, eventually we went to another neurologist who we really liked, who spent a lot of time, asked lots of questions, eliminated stuff like, is there some kind of drug interaction going on here? And then had him do the DAT scan. And although the DAT scan, they told us, was not a definitive thing, it could eliminate some things. And what they said was, it's consistent with Parkinson's. And that was probably about a year, I think, from the time we started. And I was pretty sure by that point, because I was reading a lot, and the symptoms were just so consistent with Parkinson's that I think I accepted it probably before Rich did. But once he got the results from the DAT scan, he actually seemed relieved to know what it was.
Was that accurate, Rich?
Yeah. The other thing I think worth mentioning is that, I don't know if people talk about it much, but the relationship that people have with their neurologist or their movement disorder specialist is so important. And it turned out that the second person I went to had been a classmate of my daughter's in high school.
Oh my gosh.
And we had a lot of confidence in him and his view of things and his view of medication and how this could progress or not progress was very reassuring. And so almost anything he had to say, we swallowed hook, line, and sinker, and we're still seeing him today. And it felt like a good decision.
Yeah. I mean, and it's such a, great reason to, if you don't get a great one at first, go look for somebody else,
Yes.
It's so worth it. These people are going to be with you for a really long time, hopefully. And having that relationship is so important. Jai asks, how old is Rich now? How old are you, Rich?
I just had my birthday. It's hard for me to believe I'm 77.
Boom, 77. It's amazing. So we're 13 years in, right? Yeah. So did you actually start taking that Mirapex when the doctor prescribed it, or no?
I took it when he prescribed it, and I think I took it for maybe 2 or 3 months, but I never noticed any impact of it whatsoever.
Oh, okay. No bad effects either. Just nothing. Just sort of
nothing that I was aware of. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It was really not very symptomatic. I mean, it was very subtle things.
Okay. And so when you found this new one, when did you start? Well, when did you start taking medication, and what did you take?
Well, his belief was, as many people will say, Parkinson's can progress at different paces for different people. and that until the symptoms interfered with your lifestyle, he wasn't a believer in starting medication like carbidopa, levodopa early. So I actually went for the first 6 years or so without taking any other medication, and I didn't feel a lack of it. It felt right.
Oh, good. So what happened into your quality of life that made you say, you know what, I need to start?
Can you help me remember?
Well, it was right before your 70th birthday, I think. Facial masking was probably one of the major symptoms, and the one that bothered Rich the most because he's so outgoing and so expressive. That one was really difficult for him. And although there weren't major impacts, I think shortly before he turned 70, and the doctor said the carbidopa levodopa probably will not affect facial masking. But we have some pictures from Rich's. We had some people over for his 70th birthday, and he was smiling. And it was
that's within 2 weeks of starting carbidopa levodopa.
Yeah, so it made a difference.
Yeah. Wow. It's funny that you mentioned facial masking because Rich, you probably don't remember this, but you were the one who taught me about facial masking. It was not something that I like I said, I came to the foundation really not knowing much about Parkinson's at all. And I got into the community really quickly and started talking to everybody and learning things. And you were the one who told me about facial masking. And I remember after that, like doing a deep dive into learning all about it and finding everything about it. So that's interesting. That's the first thing that you brought up.
When you talk about that, one of the things I want to mention is that for me, learning about facial masking, and it's still a process, listening to an interview, I think a podcast that Kelsey Finney did about the subject was very meaningful to me and moved me along in a significant way in terms of, if nothing else, my self-consciousness about it or acceptance of it being something that's going to come and go, and how people view that. I can never thank Kelsey enough for that podcast she did.
Yeah, that was really good one. I feel so when I end up talking to people who don't know anything about Parkinson's, but maybe they're a care partner or somebody loves them or works with them. It's one of the things I bring up as soon as possible. So a lot of times I'll talk to coaches that work with people with Parkinson's. And I always say, check in about, facial masking, because they might be saying something to you and you are confused and you aren't just not reading it. And they're really happy and into what you're saying and are excited for the workout or whatever it is. But their face might show it. And that's not you. That's Parkinson's. So, and people really appreciate it, because I can't tell you how many people have said, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And I always thought that they were upset or, not listening to what I was saying. And I would think that's a big issue, especially as you say, Rich, you are very outgoing and expressive. Let's talk a little bit then. So you were 64. Were you retired or were you still working?
I was still working.
What were you doing?
Well, I had a very varied career, and to close out my career, I took a job which was very unlike anything I'd done before, and I worked as a manager of a bus company in Boulder, which was very concrete compared to all the things I'd done in psychology and organizational development and things that were difficult to nail down.
Well, I am a fan of career topics. So what took you to bus management?
Well, I had worked as a psychologist and in human resources and various different aspects of intercultural relations and cross-cultural adjustment. And I wanted to do something that was going to be concrete where I didn't have to travel a lot. So I actually went to a local, what do they call a local transportation company to look at being a driver, something I could just do and not have to worry about. And they said, well, you shouldn't be a driver. You should manage this aspect of the company, which I did do. And I had a really good time, although not having been in the transportation field at all, I was under quite some suspect for having the skills to do that kind of a thing. One of the things I want to just quickly mention, going back to facial masking, is that I think as I've listened to people talk about their experiences with Parkinson's, how other people perceive them and how they accept themselves is an ongoing issue. And I think we all face that in one degree or another, whether it's tremor, whether it's gait, whether it's facial masking. And it just seems like facial masking is one of the various symptoms that the person experiencing it experiences it very vividly. And it's really hard to avoid that, dealing with that kind of thing if you experience facial masking. So it's a good sort of test case for how you handle different perceptions of yourself or your concerns about other people's perceptions of you that I think meant a lot to me and still does in terms of how I work through that.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think people watching who do have that symptom and experience that struggle with it. So what are some of the things that you did to sort of narrow that gap between what you thought and what you worried other people thought?
Well, partly, Mel, it was a matter of timing. I mean, I experienced it for quite a long time, and was constantly apologizing to people for the way I looked and trying to explain myself in ways that you can't control those things, so you can't really explain them either. And as people wanted to diminish the importance of what I was saying, I don't even see that sometimes. You talked about feeling self-conscious about how you look, but I don't see that at all in you. I think that kind of a interaction occurred enough to where I began to actually believe them, that it wasn't actually as severe as I thought. Although there's even times now where I may be self-conscious in a situation and it feels like it's coming back in spades for even just a day or two.
Yeah. Sharon, what was your experience with that?
I mean, I was aware of it, but I think for Rich, because that was such an important part of how he related to people, it became a very big thing. And my perception was it was not as obvious to other people, especially people who knew him well. I mean, he was still Rich. And so I think it bothered him more than it needed to. I could understand when he was meeting new people who might not know him, then he could be perceived differently. But I think for those who knew him, they were telling the truth, when I don't even notice that because they were seeing the person they knew.
Right.
But that was probably the most difficult thing early on, and partly because Rich, really the first 9 years probably, there really were not a lot of, he was not very symptomatic. Mm-hmm. And it had very little impact on our lifestyle for a long time.
Yeah. So Rich, when you retired, did you retire because Parkinson's just was say, this is just too much, I don't want to deal with it? Or was it it was the time and age you were going to retire anyway?
It was the time and age, and we felt like if we didn't have a bucket list, but if we wanted to do all the traveling that we had started on, and we were traveling 2 or 3 times a year for 10 years, many times international trips, and we figured there's a limited amount of time. If we're going to do it, we need to be free to do it now rather than later. Mm-hmm. That was really the motivating factor, to give us the freedom and choices in our lifestyle that we wouldn't maybe have 5 years going forward.
Yeah. So what were some of the most interesting trips that you guys have taken, and what are some of the things that you've learned from traveling with Parkinson's?
Well, I could talk about
Interesting question. We had a lot of wonderful trips. We had a wonderful month in Southeast Asia. That was the first time, I guess, we had gone on. We always did trips on our own. I mean, and often we would know when we were landing and where, and when we were leaving and where. And sometimes we just made up the rest as we went. But that one, because it was Southeast Asian, we didn't know the language, we actually went with a group. but that was a really interesting trip. Probably the most educational and maybe one of the saddest, because we were really seeing a lot of areas that had been impacted by war.
Mm.
We had a wonderful trip to Central Europe, where we flew in to, where did we fly into?
Prague.
Yeah. And then we took the train. We rented a car for 1 week. But other than that, we kind of traveled around on the train. And I mean, we loved Prague. We loved Budapest. I mean, it was just, that was a great trip. We took a couple bike trips. I was not a biker. I started really riding my bike at age 69. Some friends said, why don't you join us on this bike trip in southern Italy? And I knew Rich would want to do it. And I thought, if we don't do it now, we'll never do it. So I joined a women's bike group and we did that. And then a year or two later, we did a trip in southern France, or in France, in Normandy. Yeah, we just had some wonderful trips. Right up until we came back from Mexico in February of 2020, just as things shut down. Wow. And so this recent trip to Mexico for a month was the first time we'd been on a plane or out of the country for 3 years.
Oh, wow. You must have been going stir crazy.
Yeah. So, and it was a great trip.
I was going to say, one of the challenging parts about your question you just asked is that the experience of traveling with Parkinson's versus since you knew you had Parkinson's, it all sort of is a blur. And I spent a lot of time in Latin America in my life, and we lived in Chile in the early 1990s. And going back to Latin America and spending time there was always important to us. And when I think about the trips in between to South America or to Mexico, it's all sort of a blur, because I don't think about those in terms of this is what traveling with Parkinson's was like, or without Parkinson's what it was like. It's interesting, though, we just got back from a month in Mexico, and for the first time in my life, I experienced some limitations or some different perspectives on traveling and what I could do, and that was sort of, I won't say life-shattering, but I mean, realities of things that I needed to face that I hadn't really faced before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What were some of the things that were more challenging?
Well, just getting up in the morning, getting out of bed and getting moving, or going on a trip for the day where we're going to walk some significant mileage or something. I had questions about my capabilities of doing those things or not doing those things, to where I went ahead and did them, but I found myself with a tendency to consider pulling back and not taking on things that in the past I would have done without other consideration. On this last trip, I had one experience, which I won't go into right now, but we were spending the day somewhere outside of Zihuatanejo, and I got lost, and I fell, and I couldn't get up, which was really a shaking experience for me. And it took Sharon and the police hours to find me.
Oh my goodness.
And
it was scary.
So the vulnerability that I felt from that,
oh yeah,
I couldn't help myself, was really a wake-up call that I need to be thoughtful about what I take on and what I don't take on. There's not infinite there's limitations on what I can do and what I can't do, and I need to pay attention to that going forward.
Yeah.
In some ways, this was the first trip that really felt like Parkinson's was with us. I mean, prior to the pandemic, the last few trips we had still were pretty easy. And, things progressed over the last 3 years. And so this one was harder. And so one lesson we learned, which I knew I had a Find My Phone app on my phone. I did not know you could find someone else's phone. And if I had had that on my phone, that day would have been so much easier because I would have been able to find Rich really quickly.
Right.
As a result, it was a very scary day. So for anyone watching this, do that on your phone so that you can find each other.
Yeah. Rich, that sounds really scary. Yeah. Especially different country, different everything.
Luckily, he speaks Spanish,
right?
so
Yeah.
that helped.
That does help. Wow. So I lost my thought. Let me think. I was going to talk about, oh yeah. So what do you think? Well, you said that his Parkinson's has progressed, considerably more over the last few years than it had. So do you think, well, what do you think contributed to that? And was it some of the circumstances of the pandemic? Did your behaviors change? Anything like that you think, symptoms got worse?
That's a real hard question, because what complicates everything in terms of my moving and doing things as fully as I want to is I've had a series of back surgeries and back problems over the last few years, and so aside from Parkinson's, my ability to move easily and fluidly when I wake up and my sense of hitting the ground running is really very different now.
Yeah. Yeah. You were involved in our local Pedaling for Parkinson's community, but can you talk about how you did get involved in Pedaling for Parkinson's to begin with, and what role it played in your exercise and living well?
Yeah, at the time I was involved in Pedaling for Parkinson's, I was involved in lots of other classes as well.
Oh yeah, I went to the boxing at the corner gym. We're boxing with you.
Well, we've been very fortunate here in Boulder in terms of what's available. And in addition to my role with the Davis Finney Foundation, I'm very active in the local support group and planning committee. And so I was a member of the Flatirons Athletic Club, where we did the Pedaling for Parkinson's. And through a series of inadvertent events, we were able to find someone who knew the management who could talk them into giving us space for free. So I was one of the instigators in getting that program going without having any idea what the response would be. And within about 2 months, every bike was full and you couldn't get into class.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been following and trying to take classes wherever I can, finding a place where, even though there's gyms that have bikes that are sitting empty for a good part of the day, for the management to let go of those and say, well, we'll let the Parkinson's group come in and use them. It's taken some doing, although we're making progress again with that.
Oh, good. Locally in Boulder, you are?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great news. Yeah.
Locally in Boulder and in Boulder County, like the Lafayette YMCA.
Yeah. Yeah. Sharon, did you ever go to any of those classes?
I haven't gone to I went to one of the boxing classes, and I've gone to tremble class with Rich. But no, I've usually gone off to my other classes. Now I'm in the silver sneakers classes.
Nice.
At the Y.
Have you kept up the biking since you took it on back then?
Well, I switched to an electric bike this last year. Rich has been riding even over the last few weeks when there's a decent day. I haven't ridden. Actually, it's been probably a couple months now. We've had a couple nice days this week, but we got COVID when we got back from Mexico. So I just didn't feel up to going bike riding yet, but
yeah,
we want to do the bike ride in May. So yes, I need to start getting in shape.
Oh, good.
One other thing worth mentioning in terms of my connection to Pedaling for Parkinson's is early after having become an ambassador, I got to know Tom Polisi. And as you know, Tom runs a program in Arvada that I went to early on as sort of a model for what we could do. And the benefit of it to people in the class was just so stark that I was convinced that was something we should do more of.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So do you take Tom's online classes now?
I don't have a spin bike. I have an upright bike. So
okay.
I always prefer to be outside.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So, I want to go back a little bit. So you have, I mean, when you were diagnosed, you had two grown daughters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that communication like? I mean, I know you're close to them. So how did that go? What was that conversation?
Well, it's hard to pin it down to one conversation. We've had several conversations, and there are times where I might feel kind of weak or shaky and feel like I have to explain something to them. So we'll sit down, and they know that they already know what's going on. I don't need to really explain it to them, but they've been so super supportive and there all the time in a way that you wouldn't question their commitment and the relationship with me. It's just meant a whole lot to me, and it continues to be the case now.
Yeah. What about did you and Sharon, did you two have to learn anything in terms of communication because of Parkinson's or anything that is, we have so many care partners that um, want to know from people who seem to be doing it so well, what you're doing.
One of the things that when the Davis Finney Foundation came out with the Care Partner Manual, I read through that, and I've been involved with the local Care Partner support group for probably 6 or 7 years now, and which is great. It is a wonderful group, and that has been very helpful for me. But one of the suggestions in the Care Partner Manual was to have frequent check-ins with your person with Parkinson's, and so we've tried doing that. I think initially it didn't go perfectly because I think Rich thought it was my opportunity to tell him about things he wasn't doing well, like leaving dishes in the sink. So once we kind of got the idea, no, it's not just about telling each other what we're doing wrong, but just talking about, what's working, what isn't. We haven't done it. We were going to do it once a week, and we haven't done that. But I think that is a very helpful thing because things do change. And if you have something in place where it is something you just expect that you're going to talk about stuff, then I think that can be very helpful.
Yeah.
One thing I mentioned in terms of communication with my daughters, I mean, it's different with both of them. And my younger daughter, who's living in Mexico right now, has a real connection to Latin America like I do. We have lots to share there. My older daughter is an acupuncturist, and as my stiffness and stuff has increased, I've going every 2 or 3 weeks for a treatment by her. And it gives us a chance with no one else in the room for me to be on the table and her to talk about whatever. And not that we can't otherwise, but those turn out to be very special moments that we share and sort of dedicate to checking in with each other.
Oh, I love that. It sort of reminds me of the, when your kids were young and you drive them around to every sport or school, like the car conversations, there's just nothing like it.
Yes.
Right? It's just everything comes out in the car. It's like, yeah. So that's a really cool thing that you guys get to share. And it's working for you. Yes. The acupuncture is feeling great.
The other thing, this is sort of out of nowhere, but one thing I want to add into the conversation is that I went through a really difficult period with depression and anxiety 2 or 3 years ago. And I was very pessimistic about getting out of it. And on my 75th birthday, my daughters and Sharon put together this tribute video where they asked people who knew me to send in videos about our lives and what we shared. And it was mind-boggling. There were over 100 entries in there where people talked about things they knew about me and they remembered about me. And what I realized is that what was going on for those 2 or 3 years is I was becoming disconnected from myself and sort of forgetting the essence of who I was, and that wasn't going away. And listening to that video at a sort of pivotal moment was a real major contribution to my well-being.
Yeah.
You know, Mel, you asked if the pandemic had an impact. That was, the depression was during the pandemic. And I think I'm much more of an introvert. So I could read a book, I could work on the computer. I could be quite happy being isolated. That was much, much harder for Rich.
Yeah.
And I think he did. He said, I just feel like I'm losing who I am. And that the video was 3.5 hours long. We couldn't watch all of it on his birthday. We had to finish it the next day.
That's incredible.
And the messages were from people throughout his life.
Right.
So over the years, and the messages were so consistent about who he is as a person. And, we noticed when we had the first summer picnic after things opened up again, each year at the picnic, we read the names of people who've passed away in the last year. And after the pandemic, I mean, it was a much larger number than we had ever seen before. So I think the pandemic really did take a toll on people, both emotionally and physically.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Rich, what were some of the things, you got the video and it was a good wake up call. What were some of the real concrete actions that you took after that to say, to get yourself out of it, to get to where you are today?
Well, I'd like to say there were concrete actions. I'm not sure there were concrete actions other than awareness that I was missing parts of myself that were there all along and had never gone away. It was sort of a reawakening in me in a way that felt real natural versus before I couldn't relate to those aspects of myself at all.
But you did go to therapy.
I did go to therapy.
That's a big action.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Kevin is here. Kevin Schmid. You know Kevin. He says, how do you feel about your balance when you're outside riding, Rich?
That's a real fair question because my balance when I'm outside riding feels great. When people hear that I'm still riding, they say, how can you still be riding? I'm just riding a recumbent bike or something, and I don't feel comfortable. Of all the positions I can be in, as far as my back, getting up in the morning or walking, when I'm on my bike, I feel more connected to my body and with better balance than any other time.
That's interesting.
One of the things in terms of balance, Kevin, that I have noticed is that I bought an electric bike about 3 years ago, which I love, and I've never had an accident really while riding it. But it's very heavy, and if you're stopped and you're turning around and you don't have quite the right balance, sometimes it'll fall over and sort of fall over on you. And that's happened to me 2 or 3 times, which is kind of scary. I never got hurt, and my bike never got damaged, but that's different than the riding, taking a ride for 2 or 3 hours and having a question about your balance.
Right. Yeah. Those e-bikes are heavy, much heavier. But e-bikes also make it, when it gets nicer, you two can stay with each other and nobody's trying to catch up or drag behind or anything. Like I have an e-bike. My husband is just incredibly fast and I could never ride with him ever in the history of the world unless I had a little bit of his help. So,
well, one thing that this is an awareness that I've learned now, is my initial hesitation of being able to keep up with people and doing sports that I've always done. I had a hesitation to go bike riding with people who I might slow down. And what's really amazed me is everyone from Davis on down who may be a stronger bike rider than I am, we can go out and have a great time. And that the issue of how fast you're going or not going is a non-issue.
right.
And that's been really a blessing to realize that that's the case, and it doesn't have to get in the way of sharing that activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And you're both going to do Tour to Victory, which is going to be super fun again this year. Love it. What else? Is there anything that you like aside from, continuing to travel and retire? Is there anything else that you've taken up, because of Parkinson's that you may not have ever done before that is bringing you joy?
One of the things that I noticed after we got back, I had coffee one day with the two women who run the Care Partner group, and they're lovely people. And I think one of the things that, although I hate Parkinson's, the people who I've met through Parkinson's are just some of the best. Just an amazing group of caring, smart, interesting people. And I don't know what it is. I mean, and we are really fortunate here in Boulder because there's a very strong community and lots of activities.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been easy to get involved and to find, biking may not be your thing, but dance might be, or tremble clefs might be. I mean, there's just lots of variety.
Yeah. And I know both of you are, you're huge supporters, and you're involved, and you're taking the lead with this support group in the Boulder People with Parkinson's group. But Rich, that's where you are now. How soon after your diagnosis did you actually go to a support group? And was this something that you said, oh, I'm not doing that, or your first experience was not great? How did that happen?
That's a real targeted, good question. I wasn't hesitant to go to a support group, but when I went to the first support group in Boulder, it turned out to be very educational, great speaker, talking to a group of people who sat with their hands in their lap and listened to the presentation. And whatever the leaders did to try to stimulate conversation, interaction among people, sort of fell flat on its face because people weren't ready to do that. And I know I don't want to get too far afield here, but in terms of my being with people with Parkinson's, my fear all along was that Parkinson's would take over my life, and my Parkinson's world would overshadow all the rest of my relationships and the world that was so important to me. And when I found that didn't happen, I realized, and maybe it's just Boulder, I don't know, but the people that I met in Boulder with Parkinson's were, on the average, brighter, more involved, more engaged. We're a special group of people to where even if they had no Parkinson's, I would have gravitated towards spending time with them. And that's been very gratifying. As I continue to meet people now through my role as an ambassador, I'm just constantly impressed about the people who will seek you out, their openness and their wanting to learn and their willingness to share. And the quality of those relationships just mean a whole lot to me.
One of the things, Mel, shortly after Rich was diagnosed, might have been after that first year when we kind of accepted the diagnosis, there was a Victory Summit in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to that, and I know I at least had some concerns about, okay, I'm going to see where this disease can go, because there are going to be people at all stages of the disease. And that was a little hard. But it was also a very educational and helpful day. So we learned a lot. And I remember having those conversations with Rich about, I want to be involved, but I don't want it to take over my life. But Rich has a hard time just doing things a little bit. And so once he got involved, he was really involved. And it didn't take over his life, but it became a very important part of his life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those were pretty cool events too. Rich, so one last thing, I want to talk about treatments. We talked a little bit about acupuncture. We said, you take carbidopa, levodopa. Are you still on that? What is your medication, and what are some of the treatments that you've tried, whether other medications or complementary therapies that have helped you?
Well, as far as acupuncture goes, I love getting treatments by my daughter, but I can't really point out to specific results in terms of how I'm feeling in acupuncture. As far as the medications, I've taken carbidopa levodopa now for probably 6 years, and I take ropinirole as a dopamine agonist. But one of the things that continues to sort of surprise me and make me curious is I don't seem to have the same direct experience of timing of medication and impact of downtimes and uptimes and downtimes as other people do. And so my regimen and my being careful about when I take my medication is far from perfect. One of the things that I've noticed in the last 3 or 4 months is I started experiencing some dyskinesia for the first time in my life. And I maybe I heard it before, but I never paid that much attention to it. The dyskinesia comes from being over medicated or having too much levodopa. So actually, I started in the last 4 or 5 months to cut back the levodopa, the extended release during the day, and that seems to have made a big difference. But I haven't played around a lot with different medications because the interaction between how I'm feeling, my degree of anxiety. There's medications that I might get from a psychiatrist that are helpful in those areas that are not really Parkinson's medications.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think you bring up a good point, though. You said, oh, well, that's just not something I ever really thought about because, it wasn't there. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges with Parkinson's is that because it shows up in 8 million different iterations, that when people are newly diagnosed, they're going to look forward and they're going to look at people who've had it for a long time and they're going to try to see, like, am I going to be that? And there's just no way.
Yeah.
There's just no way of predicting. And so the tool is to stay where you are and deal with the symptoms you have. And
that's so true.
Worry about something else later.
When I meet people through the Davis Finney Foundation and they want to know, how's this going to progress? Where am I headed? And obviously there's no answer to that. My describing my own experience as being variable and not straight line can be reassuring, even though yours might not be the same as mine.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there anything I didn't ask about that I should have asked about?
Well, I guess you could ask about other family members, which you haven't. And my sister lives in New York City, and my brother lives in France. And we see each other fairly often, and they're interested and caring about my situation and remember my dad's experience with Parkinson's probably better than I do because I wasn't at home for most of the time that he experienced it.
Okay. Yeah. Were you already away at college or something when he was diagnosed? Yeah. That is interesting.
My brother and sister and my sister-in-law are all very concerned and want to check in and involve me in discussions and know what's going on. They've referred me to people in Europe who aren't familiar with Davis Finney Foundation or DBS and want to look into that. So they've been great as far as that goes. They can only go so far in terms of depth in terms of what's going on and to really understand it. But they're caring and they're being there consistently. It means a lot.
Yeah, you are fortunate, right? That is great that you have that. Is DBS something that you are thinking about?
No.
Oh, okay. I was like,
they ask because everybody else is thinking about it.
Yeah, okay.
But my experience is that I don't have a lot of motor symptoms, and so I haven't thought about it in that respect.
Yeah.
The other thing that is worth noting, I've been involved in a men's group for about 21 years, and there's a lot of consistency of people in that men's group. There are people I've shared all kinds of outdoor activities with, and two of the three other people have serious physical issues right now, and our ability to support each other and inquire and be there has meant a lot as a consistency thing over the years, and continues to be something that you can really count on. So that means a lot. It's my other support group.
Yeah. I think knowing what happened for you for certain during COVID is it's important for you to have those things, and you know it, right? And you know it now probably more than ever. Maybe
Absolutely.
something that you just knew that was going to happen, and when it went away, you definitely suffered. So it's great to have those part of Parkinson's, not Parkinson's, whatever those groups are that you can connect with is pretty great. Family.
The other thing you asked about, worth mentioning about initially getting involved in support group activities and things in Boulder. There's a guy named Paul Brown. I'll leave him named. His wife is very active in the Care Partner support group. But Paul approached me 6 months after I was diagnosed to have coffee and to talk about being on the planning committee. And Paul was sort of the person who started it all in Boulder. He gets a lot of credit for that. He was a remarkable guy. So I credit him to having eased the transition into this world that otherwise I might not have gotten involved in for a long time. And that meant a lot to me.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me, I was talking to Kimberly, Wayne and Kimberly Campanello. She's a poet at University of Leeds, and she's young onset. And she was telling me about how, so she was sort of, I think she'd had it for at least 18 months, 2 years before she told work and sort of real publicly. And she was telling me about how somebody reached out to her who had been recently diagnosed, and within a couple of weeks, this whole group of women with Parkinson's took this woman out to dinner. And all I could think of was, oh my gosh, can you imagine? Can you imagine how just comforting and relieving that would feel to get this diagnosis where you feel like, oh, I'm alone. Nobody's going to get this. And what am I going to do? And then all of a sudden you're just at a dinner table with 5 or 6 women who get it. So thankfully you had Paul, right? His name is Paul, you said?
Paul Brown.
Yeah. And that now people have you. I know that as an ambassador, you get people reaching out to you all the time. So yeah, just having that person to reach out and say, get involved, or you can do this, you can do that, and I'm here for you is so important. So I love that. Well, thank you both for taking the time today. It's always lovely to see you and to talk to you. And I look forward to the Tour to Victory again this year so we can see each other. And yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mel.
Thank you, Mel.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.